Yes, the Zodiac Killer was caught. He was caught at the Golden Gate Theater in San Francisco. My understanding is not too far from the Chronicle where he sent all those letters, and I guess not too far from the Presidio where he killed a cab driver. There was a guy who owned the theater and produced a movie. He'd produced some movies before or helped produce them, kind of knew how to do it. So he produced this really low budget movie for $13,000. He called it The Zodiac Killer. That's simple. He knew that that Frank's ego was so out of there that if he made a movie and said, you know, catch me if you can, and I don't know, whatever else he put on the advertisement, it was really attractive to Frank, and he knew it would be. So he was going to attract him to this movie and try to catch him. This movie, by the way, beat the Dirty Harry movie out by 6 months, and the Dirty Harry movie had a killer in it, and I think it was calling himself Scorpio, and this was kind of patterned after some of the Zodiac killings. Hal Reed played the Zodiac part of the Zodiac Killer. Played the part of the Zodiac Killer in this movie, The Zodiac Killer. That was played in this theater, Golden Gate Theater in San Francisco. What they did was they had a box. They had a box where you could pick up a ticket when you go to the movies, and it said on the ticket, "I think the Zodiac Killer, I think the Zodiac kills because," and you could write down there what you thought about why the Zodiac Killer killed. They hid this guy out in a freezer, and it was actually the screenwriter that helped write the movie. And he was, they fixed it up so he could see out there, and he was going to, you know, see if he saw anybody that he thought might be the Zodiac, they would grab the guy and, you know, whatever. Well, turns out the guy got locked in the freezer. Now that reeks of Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers, because the old-fashioned freezers, they had a handle, you had to pull it back away from the freezer like that, and it unlatched a latch inside of the freezer. That's what you had to do to get it open. And when you close it, that thing latched. If you were on the inside, you weren't going to get out. You were going to die. A lot of kids did die crawling into freezers and refrigerators in those days, and they finally took those latches off. But that, I'm imagining that they decided to rig the thing up with something so that the latch couldn't close all the way. You just take a piece of wood or something. And I'm figuring Frank Morris and the Anglin brothers were hanging around when they were setting up for this thing the day before or whatever, and they asked enough questions to enough people to find out what they were going to do, and they went over there and pulled the plug on this guy and locked him in the freezer. I'm laughing, but he almost died, and then Frank and them, that's the kind of thing they do, because they didn't care if they killed somebody. That was what turned them on. But they while the guy was in there, Frank goes and gets this ticket and writes on it, where it says, "I think the Zodiac kills because," and he writes on it, "I was here, the Zodiac Killer," and he puts his Zodiac sign on there. Now, if you take a look at this writing, if I can get the camera up there where you can see it, you will see that it exactly matches Frank Morris's writing on on all the Zodiac Killer letters that he sent in. It matches his writing on the D.B. Cooper letters that he sent in. It matches his writing all the way back to the Black Dahlia letters that he sent in to the press so they would send it to the police, taunting, you know. It also matches his signature on the note that Frank and the Anglin brothers wrote to the warden, telling him, haha, we made it. So take a look at this, and if you want to go look those other things up, you can find them, and you will see that it's the same writing. If you don't feel like looking them up, watch some of my videos. I've actually looked them up for you and done videos and compared the writing on all of these different things. And I'm going to prove it was Frank Lee Morris. And there it is. That's the ticket. I think the Zodiac kills because, and the people who come in to watch the movie could write on here why they thought he killed and drop it in a box. That guy hid in the refrigerator, and he was looking to see if he could figure out who the Zodiac Killer was, and this is what Frank wrote on there. I was here, the Zodiac Killer. Amazing how much evidence Frank really left around and never got caught. So, and Frank told me, he said, they caught me, and he said, and I go, so what did you say? And I just tried to be as nice as I could. And I go, well, what, and all this time I'm not having a clue what he's talking about. He says, and I said, well, what happened? He says, I don't know. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, well, you figure at a time like that, they'd call the FBI or the police or something. And I go, why would they call the FBI on you? And he goes, no, just because of the theater and everything. Trying to, keep me going and not scare me too much because I was just a kid, probably 16, 17. And he said, he said, I don't know what happened. I figured this was it. I just accepted it was over. And I said, what was over? And he goes, that whole thing that I've been telling you about, it was going to be over. And I go, what are you talking about? He goes, well, don't worry about it. But what happened? I said, well, what happened? And he goes, well, they let me go. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, I don't know. They let me go. I go, why? And he goes, that's what actually happened that day at the theater. Because Frank and the Anglins got in there. They locked this guy in a freezer so he couldn't see Frank when he dropped that note in there. And if I know Frank, the note was already, he got that ticket somehow without touching it and took it somewhere and wrote this thing on it and brought it inside of an envelope or something where he didn't have to touch it and dropped it in that box because he wouldn't have never left his fingerprints on that thing. So anyway, that's the story of how the Zodiac Killer was actually captured. The police didn't get involved. Who knows why Tom Hansen didn't call the police. If he's still out there and alive, I'd like for him to get a hold of me and talk to me about it. But the Zodiac Killer really pulled another smooth one. Now after that, they made another movie, a documentary. Someone made a documentary about that movie, and it was called Zodiac Man. They're calling Tom Hansen the Zodiac Man. It was a true story, and it's called The True Story of the Man Who Made a Movie to Catch the Zodiac Killer. And I think it was another movie they made and get people to go watch it. Frank Morris walked free and murdered lots of my girlfriends and friends and tried to kill me 1,000,000 times. And end of life type story to tell, I guess. But I appreciate your comments, and I would appreciate you subscribing to my channel and watch some of my other videos. I knew the Zodiac Killer, and I've told you his whole story up and down. I wrote a book on it called My Dance with the Zodiac Killer. If you read that book and you watch my videos, you're going to know everything about him, and everything I tell you came right out of his mouth. And you naysayers that get on here and write me a whole page of, it couldn't have been this, and it couldn't have been that, and you couldn't have done this, and you couldn't have done that, and why this, and why that, and why that. I mean, they wonder why I delete those stupid comments. I can't answer all of those questions. I will have to write a book about it. And, if you got a question for me, one question at a time. And if you want to mouth off and tell me how it can't be, then go somewhere and stick your head where the sun don't shine, because I'm just going to delete your comment. I survived the 3 most notorious murderers in the history of this country, and I don't like being pushed around about it, so don't ruffle my feathers.